really simple. There is really no plan because it's an overall strategy for us. We don't change things based off of what the difficulty is or what the hash rate is, because any miner who needs to do that is insanely sensitive to the price of Bitcoin, which means that their costs are way too high. It's great to be on. And the state of the miners really just depends on your cost structure. So post-halving, as everyone knows, the Bitcoin rewards got cut in half. And so anyone who did not have streamlined operations is probably feeling it. And you can definitely tell there's become a little bit more of a separation. Now, you get that more anecdotally because the earnings results have not come out yet. We're going to start seeing them in probably about a month or so. And we'll start seeing results that include the halving in them, not entirely because the halving happened during the quarter. But we'll see a pretty good picture. And what I've been noticing, at least anecdotally, is that the companies that have low costs or lots of cash, such as the really large guys, the billion plus market cap guys, they seem to be operating as usual. The smaller ones that might not have as good a cost structure, they've suddenly gone a lot more quiet, and that they are not necessarily being as aggressive. Some I've noticed, and I've heard through the grapevine and heard through investment banks, that they're looking for opportunities to sell themselves or restructure or do something like that. So it really just depends on your cost structure, which is something Gryphon has always been noting, and I've always been saying that this is going to be the halving, is going to be the reckoning of those who have high cost structures. And I think we're already seeing that, because I've already seen at least 2 companies crawl across my desk who are looking to sell themselves because probably they're not quite making it post-halving.
So you think that the price in April has more or less gone down? So the price in April was, I'm just checking now, roughly not too far away. It's about 60k euro. So it was about 63, 64k, and now it's at 57. You think that the price fall is due to miners basically selling?
Well, I think some miners are selling, and that's certainly possible, especially those that might be now upside down in their cost structure or very close to being upside down. If they had any excess Bitcoin, they would probably be starting to sell to cover their costs. What it is, though, is that 64 to 57 isn't really that big of a difference. Like, that's with Bitcoin moving 5-10%, maybe 15-20% in a single day sometimes. I wouldn't say that a 62 to 57 gap is all that meaningful. Like, really lately, the reason why I think the price of Bitcoin has dropped to the 50s levels is really the liquidation of the Mt. Gox at Bitcoin assets, as well as some seizures that's happened. I heard in Germany, where the German government might be selling as well. So it's just short-term excess supply that's coming onto the market, and traders are smart. If they know supply is coming on, they'll pull back their bids and wait for that supply to come through before they start lifting the price again, because there's just more supply coming in. And so yeah, I think that it is some minor selling, but it's really just more everyday normal trading activity that's causing the Bitcoin prices to move up and down like that. Like, here's the other thing to look at too, is that if you overlay the price chart for Bitcoin during this period, and you compare it to the similar periods in previous halvings, it's pretty similar. And what you've noticed is that post Bitcoin halving, the price comes down a little bit, and then for some reason it just spikes. If you
Yeah.
looked at the last couple of halvings, that's what happens, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happened again.
Same. Although for the first time ever before this halving, the price did actually go to the all-time high, which was a
Yes.
first. So it's already
Yeah, certainly.
behaving better.
Mhm.
So what is the difficulty adjustment exactly in Bitcoin, and why is it so important in this current phase?
Yeah, well, it's important all the time because the Bitcoin network is designed to have a block solved in every 10-minute period. And so the difficulty adjustment is basically keeping us on track to be in and about 10 minutes per time. Because what ends up happening is, as more global hash rate comes on, there's more hash rate, so there's more opportunities to solve the algorithm that creates every block. And if you get enough, you'll start speeding up, and the probabilities of answering the block faster than 10 minutes starts increasing, and then you'll see situations where blocks get solved much faster than before, and inside the 10-minute time frame. So what the difficulty adjustment does is it takes that into account, And then after every epoch, what it will do is it will make itself either harder, which is when it's when they're solving too fast, or easier, so that if it's too long. So post halving, at one point we were lagging incredibly in terms of the solving time, and then it adjusted, and now we're seeing it adjust different ways. So it's an important aspect of Bitcoin because it is designed to be answered every 10 minutes, and the difficulty adjustment keeps us on track for that.
So it's now easier to mine because difficulty adjustment has kicked in, and the
Uh,
global and
Well,
yeah,
yes and no. It's in periods, right? Because it's trying to push it to 10 minutes is what the real point of the difficulty adjustment is. So when things are going too well or being solved too quickly, the difficulty adjustment gets harder so
yes.
that it gets back to 10 minutes, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say it's easier. It gets easier in shorter periods and harder in other periods, entirely dependent on where we're sitting at relative to 10 minutes.
Okay, because basically my next question was
Yep.
aimed at the hash rate. So the hash rate is down where it
Yep.
was, let's say, a month ago. So in this case, what does Gryphon Digital Mining do with all this information? How does it plan out what it's going to do?
But it's actually really simple. There is really no plan because it's an overall strategy for us. We don't change things based off of what the difficulty is or what the hash rate is, because any miner who needs to do that is insanely sensitive to the price of Bitcoin, which means that their costs are way too high, right? Because if you need to do something just because it moves a little bit, then that's not really going to work. But at least, but it is the fact of the matter of how some things are. So our strategy is to be a low cost, most efficient operator out there, or as best as we can be. And what that means is that we try to position ourselves below everyone else in terms of costs. Because what the Bitcoin industry mining game really is, it's a relative mining game, in that when costs go up, or when you're having forces costs to go up because you get half the reward, so that basically your cost per Bitcoin basically has doubled. Those who have high cost structures are the ones that need to turn off when they become in unprofitable businesses. So, and as those guys come off, the global network hash rate drops because their hash rate will have to fall off as they turn off their machines because they're no longer profitable. And what that means for the rest of us who are still profitable, we actually do a little bit better.
Yeah.
So because there's less competition, right? And so our strategy is always to be as cheap in terms of our mining Bitcoin costs as possible and as efficient as possible, so that we are the last guys who need to be forced to turn off. Because basically what it is the more people who are forced to turn off, the better it is for us, because we actually make more Bitcoin as more guys turn off. So that's our strategy, and that's always been our strategy. So we don't need to do anything day to day or month to month. It's because we've always, in our 4-year existence, done it this way, and it's worked out.
So I imagine that you have invested Gryphon. I don't know how it's to pronounce it, but I imagine Gryphon. Okay, you guys have invested a lot in technology, and I imagine the strategy is also to constantly adapt to the new technology on the market. Is this how you maintain those efficiencies with cost?
Yeah, well, that's the easy way, and that's the way that everyone can replicate, is get the latest and greatest miners. That's the easiest one to do. So for a while, we had the newest machines around, and now that there are iterations that have been improved, because it's been about 4 years now since we first started, those newer machines are now more efficient. And so yes, we've been keeping up by buying more of those new machines to replace some of our old ones. And also, as we expand and get bigger, the new space that we get, we've been buying newer, more efficient machines. So that is one of the easier ways to stay efficient. But the other way, which is not followed as closely, and that's what really separates management, is that you need to have the right experience and know how to design your mine operations so that they are operating at the most optimal way. Because what we've noticed is that many companies have declared very large hash rate expansions, but they don't really spend as much time, in my opinion, making sure those operations work well. So you end up having uptimes that are very low. Like our last month, we reported 99.4% uptime, which is close to 100, and one of the better ones, I believe, in the whole industry. Where you have others that are struggling to be 95, some might be actually under 90%. So it's all well and good to report that you have a lot of hash rate, but if they're not running, it doesn't matter, right? And so that's one of the key things in efficiency. And that goes on to a larger aspect in terms of, once again, management ability, in that you should pick locations that make more sense in terms of efficiencies. A lot of people went to Texas, and Texas is great. Texas has low cost power, very welcoming to mining. Texas is also very, very hot. So For machines that are air cooled, which there are significant numbers there, they're often forced to shut off because they're overheating. It's because Texas is hot. We're located in upstate New York, which is a lot cooler temperature wise than Texas. So our instances of needing to shut off because of heat is significantly lower. The other part too, for example, using Texas, and I don't mean to pick on Texas, but it's just really popular. So I just use that as a reference. Texas also has a fairly poor electrical grid, which requires miners to turn off their machines every so often when the power demands of the state are needed to take in more power. So that means those machines aren't running. And so you're not mining Bitcoin at that time. You're basically a power provider, which is lucrative to some miners, but doesn't mean that you're a Bitcoin miner anymore. At that point, you're actually a power provider, which is helpful, but it's a different thing. Whereas we don't have that. Gryphon is located in an economic opportunity zone. And so if anything, there's not much demand for electricity at all. And our presence there is actually justifying the deployment of economic power for people in the area, which is helpful.
In which countries are you currently in, Griffin?
Just US.
Just
Yeah,
the
just US.
US.
We're located mostly in upstate New York, actually entirely, but we are looking to expand to other areas, mostly in the US.
And you
In Canada.
use alternative sources of energy to get your power,
No,
basically.
we're 100% hydro. So if you consider that alternative, I don't think it really is. It's kind of a base load power source, but we are 100% renewable, which we're very proud of. Independently third-party certified. We're scope 1 and 2 zero carbon emissions.
Wow. Okay. And with the let's say the election coming up, it seems like regulation is coming. Are you guys self-regulating? Are you operating in a manner that is going to be looked at from a positive point of view, do you think, by the government? What's your opinion currently on current and potentially new regulations?
Yeah, regulations are definitely necessary and required for the evolution of any type of financial, and let's get real. Bitcoin is a very strong financial instrument. So for the global network, for the global populace to be comfortable with using Bitcoin as everyday transactions to replace the US dollar or the yen or whatever, you need to have proper regulation so that users of it feel safe in using it. So I think regulation is going to be necessary for the growth of the Bitcoin network and for the every average Joe to actually use Bitcoin. And so we're very welcoming of that. Of course, thoughtful and proper regulation is the key, as opposed to ham fisting and just taking something from the current banking network and applying it to Bitcoin, which we've seen a little bit of. So to answer your question, do we self-regulate? Yes. Interestingly enough, as a Bitcoin miner, there really isn't that much that we need to be necessarily concerned with, because really, fundamentally speaking, our business model is very simple and we don't really do that much. When you look at it relative to the whole Bitcoin network. We do provide the backbone of it by providing hash rate so that the Bitcoin network works. But beyond that, as a Bitcoin miner, especially since we just put our hash rate into a pool, we don't really make decisions that impact the Bitcoin network. That's usually for someone else to do. We're really just a provider of power, provider of hash rate. So we do support proper regulation, and we have a great person, Brittany Kaiser, who's the chair of our board, who is very engaged in the whole Bitcoin network. She sits in the congressional committee for blockchain and Wyoming, and so she has a good seat at the table for things like that. And then in any situation, such as every so often a government organization might ask for some feedback or roundtables, and whenever we have the opportunity, we participate those so we can help shape the regulations.
Oh, good. So there's already a good, let's say, bridge between Griffin and the regulators.
I'd like to think so, yes.
That's good. So mining has gone from mining on the laptop to mining, I mean, country-wise. Where is it going? And one of its what it's left with is heat. Now a lot of heat. What's being done innovation-wise to, let's say, recycle that heat so that miners can generate a revenue stream from, let's say, transaction fees, the reward, and ... What else can be done by miners?
Yeah, that's the great thing. I love this idea, and people are starting to use it. We actually went fairly down the path with this opportunity where it was using the heat for farming, and so there are greenhouses that were going to be built that shunts the heat over and use it to heat plants so that they can grow in more optimal conditions. I love that concept, and I've heard of situations where people build in Bitcoin miners to heat their homes in certain ways or keep certain areas warm. So things like that, where you use the excess heat to do good. it is certainly very inviting, and I think is a great opportunity, and I'd love to embrace it. As Gryphon starts to expand and we look to own our own facilities and we have operations that generate heat, I will certainly be very aggressively looking for opportunities to capture value and actually help the environment really, with the excess heat that we do get generated. So it's an exciting area. It's still new. I hear of some projects going forward doing that, which I'm talking about the greenhouse thing. But yeah, I'd be very interested to see other reasons, other opportunities.
Yeah, even me. We're all interested in knowing what these miners are gonna do next, you know. So my next question, and it's more or less my last one, is do you believe in the 4-year cycle? And if you do, if you don't, where do you see the Bitcoin mining industry moving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. Well, the 4-year cycle, like I've been doing this since 2018, which doesn't seem long, but for publicly traded companies, it's long because I was part of the first NASDAQ listed one. So there weren't that many before that. Well, there were none on the US at that time. So I am familiar with it. And thus far, it has been about a 4-year cycle. Just when I thought that machines weren't going to be improved that much because the growth increments were slower, we're getting the current generation of machines that are coming out, which are significantly better than the best machines that we saw during the last 4-year cycle. So I do believe it is happening still, and what that really means is that we are, as miners, we are required to switch over to the more efficient machines because you just can't stay economic for long with those older machines after a certain period of time. Like right now, they still work, especially if you have low cost, they work, but the likelihood of it working for someone is lower now because and is entirely dependent on one's cost structure. Because those with high cost operations, those older machines don't work anymore. But those of us like us who have lower cost structures can still make that work. But it's just much easier to have the newer machines. So it is going to be it will continue to be a thing every 4 years that the machine cycle has to refresh.
Interesting. Okay, basically, I think I've asked all my questions. If there's maybe a comment on if you're aware of, let's say, countries starting to mine Bitcoin, or if you're aware of stuff like this, is that happening at the moment?
We believe they are. It's hard to find data like that because it's not in anyone's best interest to really share that information if they're doing it. But I would not be surprised if nation states are mining Bitcoin to put into their own coffers. It's kind of like the having gold to protect your currency or to protect from some value. I think countries are starting to embrace or actively using Bitcoin as another form of value protection or a currency hedging relative to that. So certainly not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Russia's doing a whole lot of it because I've been hearing a lot of machines going into Russia. Of course, it could be going to private operators or oligarchs there, but who knows? It could also be state-run mining that's happening so that they can offset the political climate right now where they're being embargoed on a few things. So that's also possible there.
Funny though, because you can't really make much anymore on mining with regards to the daily amount you could possibly make, you know? So from a country point of view, I would imagine they have to buy.
Yeah, well, you also look at it this way because from a country point of view, is electricity really a cost? Because once you're a nation state, you can kind of just generate it, and yes, there is a cost associated to it, but it's not as if you can't run a deficit in those situations. If you really want to run the electrical power plant, regardless, you still can. And as the government, you could just keep running it at a loss, and it doesn't really matter. Whereas, and that's also with the longer term foresight that if one believes that Bitcoin will be significantly higher, like many of us Bitcoiners believe, it doesn't matter if you're mining at a loss now. If you fully believe that in a few months to a year from now, it's going to be significantly higher. And I think most people who are into Bitcoin believe that we're going to be past 100,000 sometime. I think it's going to be before the end of this year. And so, does it really matter if you're at a loss right now? If anything, now is the time because you can buy machines for cheaper because it's more difficult right now for most, and this is the time to actually grow. And that's
Yeah.
standard for any type of business, right? You buy real estate when the streets are running with blood, that type of concept. So
In,
you buy when things are down.
in fact, I was just having a look at your website, and on it you said that you believe that the new high could come in at around 150, possibly even 200.
Yes,
You're still a believer of that.
absolutely,
Absolutely. And that will probably
absolutely. If you
come
look,
next year, I
yeah,
imagine.
yeah. Well, even by the end of this year, like it sounds crazy, but when you look at the Bitcoin price performance over history, it doesn't act normally. It will do things like this where it's moving up and down maybe 1 to 5% on a daily basis. And then overnight, it'll decide to take a 2 week period where it's jumping up 5 to 15% every day. And it just shoots up much higher. So it's the nature of Bitcoin that it does that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see skyrocketing jumps at certain points.
I think it's like it's very fair Bitcoin. So it comes down and it says, listen, you have a chance to buy some at this cheap price. Listen, you have
Yep.
another chance. Listen, you have another chance. Listen, you have another chance. That's it. I'm going up. And then it
Yeah,
will go up
exactly, right.
with or without you, with or without you.
And it's a running joke I write on my Twitter as well about how people always say, "Hey, I wish I bought it when it was lower," and then when it gets there, they don't buy it. So
I
this is
know.
another time when you could have
I
bought
know.
it in the 50s, and you're not going to, but you're going to say you wish you did it when we're at 100. So
That's right.
I fully expect we're going to see that type of thing. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
it is what it is.
It's normal. It's normal. But okay, I've asked all my questions. Mr. Chang, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I will basically now write the article. I think this is good material to write. From what I've taken is that mining is super healthy at the moment, correct? And
It's healthy for some of us. It's healthy in general, but those of us who have high costs are struggling now for sure. It was much healthier last quarter when before halving. How about that?
yeah, I had I did some research on a bunch of the publicly listed mining companies, and what I found was that they are extremely volatile, more volatile than Bitcoin, way more volatile than Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's quite possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's more investors in stocks, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you very much. I've asked my questions.
Sounds good. Well, thanks a lot for your time. It was fun.
Cool. Thank you very much, guys. Ciao, ciao.